Yeah. Well, equity is another, it's a synonym for the sort of the obverse, which is racism and white supremacy. I've been hearing my ear is more attuned to Biden's endless repetition of systemic racism. And they're the same thing. I mean, equity is the response to systemic racism. Equity means quotas. It means the destruction of meritocratic standards. It means you hire and promote on the basis of race, not on the basis of qualifications. And any institution which does not show a proportional number of Blacks or Hispanics is thereby, by definition, systemically racist and engaged in bias.
We have heard Joe Biden say the phrase equity roughly 1 billion times in his few weeks of, I'll have to get fact checked on that, but in his few weeks of office. I mean, equity, equity, equity. You may remember that just, 2 or 3 days before the election, Kamala Harris released that video on Twitter talking about that we should all end up in the same place. This is obviously very different than equality. Are you kind of shocked, or does it just all fit that we sort of slipped equity under the guise of equality into the system just that quickly? Where now if you say you're against equity, which is just sort of an imaginary position, well, of course you're racist and everything else.
Yeah. Well, equity is another, it's a synonym for the sort of the obverse, which is racism and white supremacy. I've been hearing my ear is more attuned to Biden's endless repetition of systemic racism. And they're the same thing. I mean, equity is the response to systemic racism. Equity means quotas. It means the destruction of meritocratic standards. It means you hire and promote on the basis of race, not on the basis of qualifications. And any institution which does not show a proportional number of Blacks or Hispanics is thereby, by definition, systemically racist and engaged in bias. And I'm fully expecting Ibram Kendi, the big anti-racist huckster right now, who's probably the most highest paid of them. He may have even bumped out Ta-Nehisi Coates to end up in the federal government and set up a agency of anti-racism that will go after every private institution using the completely dangerous and unjustified tool of disparate impact, which holds that any neutral process, such as saying, right, we expect you as a Alzheimer's researcher to have a highly competitive knowledge of the way neurology works. If that standard has a disparate impact on Blacks, then you get rid of the standard and say we're going to replace it with quotas. The fact of the matter is the academic skills gap in this country is so vast that it is preposterous to claim that the lack of proportional representation in any institution is the result of bias. The facts are these. Black eighth graders, 54% of all Black eighth graders in this country do not even have basic math skills. Basic is defined by the National Association of Educational Progress, the NAEP, as partial mastery of math concepts. 54% of Black eighth graders are below basic in their math skills. 40% are below basic in their reading skills. That is, they do not even have partial mastery of eighth grade reading skills. That gap does not close. It continues at the SAT level, where you have a standard deviation of gap, LSATs, GMATs, MCATs. Everywhere you see that distinction.
And by the way, their response is to now get rid of many of these things, right?
Right, exactly. Right. They're going to get rid of, that's why they're getting rid of the SATs. And my prediction is we are also eventually going to get rid of crime data. You are going to have police departments. It's already very hard to get your hands on crime offending data and criminal victimization data as well. And that is eventually going to be repressed as well in order to further strengthen the phony narrative that the disproportion of Blacks in the prison system is due to racism, not to exponentially higher rates of criminal offending.
So I think when some people hear you say that, when they hear, okay, well, 54% of Black eighth graders aren't at that level, or the level that they should be at, that they say, well, then that proves that there's systemic racism. If it's so disproportionate to Black people, I think at a surface level thought, I think that's what happens there. So can you just go a little bit beneath that, maybe as a comparison to the Asian community? Because I know you've written a lot about that.
Well, I proposed a thought experiment, which is that if Blacks acted like Asians for 10 years in all regards to things that have a bearing on academic success, on success in life, such as being fanatical about schoolwork, having parents that care about whether you're going to class, whether you're truant or not, taking your textbooks home, studying for the next exam, not, screaming at your teacher, beating up your teacher, not getting involved in drugs or gangs, having a very low out-of-wedlock birth rate. If all those behaviors were the same, and then we saw the socioeconomic disparities that we do, then it would be more than enough time to start talking about systemic racism. But right now, you have a culture, and you have addressed this, Dave, with your fantastic interview with Brandon of Blexit, a inner city culture that stigmatizes academic effort, that celebrates violence, criminality, that is completely inimical to success in life. When the behaviors are so different, it is way premature to talk about systemic racism. There is a lot that can be done, at least in theory. I mean, we've been trying for decades without a whole lot of success, but it remains theoretically possible to change the culture and the behaviors that I think are clearly related to the fact that we don't have absolute equity in outcomes that Kamala Harris and Biden pretend to want. And as long as we can't talk about those behaviors, and we keep going down this path of demanding more quotas, more transfer payments, nothing is going to change.
Yeah, and by the way, of course, the great Thomas Sowell has been talking about this forever, that in effect is what the welfare state did. Do you think there's anything, though, the government could do? Let's say we had a government, certainly not the government we have at the federal level now, but if there was a government to come in and say, okay, we want to address these issues around the family, around generations on welfare, all of these things, we want to address it. What do you do? I mean, I've heard some people like Candace Owens say, you just stop the programs tomorrow and you let that pain point hit. Do you think there's a sensible policy there? Do you say just end everything? What's the actual action that can happen?
Government cannot do social uplift. It doesn't know how to do it. And of course, right now you have government, the social work schools are cranking out government workers that are utterly committed to non-judgmentalism when it comes to self-destructive behavior. Like I remember in the 90s in New York, I used to write a lot about welfare reform and would talk to these nonprofit workers, and they were adamant that they couldn't say a word about out-of-wedlock childbearing, which is the biggest predictor of poverty in this country. If we could wipe out out-of-wedlock childbearing, re-knit families together, we'd get rid of poverty and we'd get rid of almost all crime. And it's happening now in the white community as well, among the Hillbilly Elegy population as well. Charles Murray's written about that. So government does not know how to change people's upbringing. So yes, it would be a great thing. I would absolutely back Candace Owens of going cold turkey. And there were proposals about that for during the welfare reform era of the 1990s, of at least not giving more checks, larger checks when people had more children out of wedlock. But that was a very hard sell. I would say government, what it's there for is providing public order, providing the basis for people to exercise their own initiative. That is, above all, safe streets so that businesses don't have to worry about their employees. They can set up shop, and people can thrive and get where they need to go without fear.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.